Hello everyone. Our presenter today is İlke Hiçsönmezler. Thank you, İlke, for accepting our invitation to present your master thesis presentation. İlke Hiçsönmezler graduated from the undergraduate architecture program of Yarı University in 2021 on a full scholarship. After that, she began her master's degree with thesis in the Department of Architecture at also Yarı University. Her focus has been on the picturesque and aesthetic theories, which serve as the subject matter for her thesis, and she has published several works on that topic. Currently, İlke is doing her PhD in the Department of Architecture in Yarı University on a full scholarship, and her research interests are aesthetics and architecture, picturesque, spatial atmosphere, neuroaesthetics, and cognition. And today her presentation called Picturesque Atmosphere, a method to read spatiality and aesthetics in the verbal and visual artworks.
Thank you, Deniz Hocam, for your introduction. So today, as Deniz Hocam mentioned, I will present my master thesis to you. The title of the thesis is The Picturesque Atmosphere. So it starts with the theories of the atmosphere, which carries the picturesque out of the frame, and continues with the aesthetics and picturesque. So in this respect, the examples of picturesque in verbal artworks forms the chapter 4, and the examples of the picturesque in visual artworks constitute the chapter 5. There is also an epilogue part, which undertakes the role of the whole summary of the thesis. So starting with the first chapter, these are the main issues that I discussed in the introduction part. Baumgarten defined the term aesthetics as a separate discipline and defined it as a science of sensual cognition and the art of thinking beautifully in his seminal work, Aesthetica. This definition has also set up the dualities of the term like subject and object and also the beautiful and sublime. Therefore, the categories of beautiful and sublime, however, followed by the picturesque, evaluated within the framework of aesthetics in the 18th and also the 19th centuries as well. So the picturesque is a multi-layered concept, laying out its intrinsic idea. However, the basic meaning of the term and its application in paintings and landscapes were mainly discussed under the classical understanding of aesthetic judgments because of the power of the dual aesthetic categorization of the 18th century, that is the beautiful and also the sublime. Especially the picture-like of the term, meaning picture-like of the term, were reduced to a design language that can only be understood by the sense of sight at best. However, I may claim that the concept of picturesque depends on a multisensory and even parasensory aesthetics. Therefore, it is possible to discuss the concept of picturesque of the 18th and 19th centuries by referring to the spatial atmosphere of the 20th and 21st centuries and by introducing a new term, the picturesque atmosphere. However, because of the accessibility limitations, to find examples in different visual representation modes other than painting, and I propose a reading model that is derived from the atmosphere theories. So in this respect, I aim to answer the question that in what ways does the picturesque differ from the beautiful and sublime? How can one read the picturesque through the lens of the atmosphere theories? How do the theories of atmosphere carry the dominant gaze of the 18th century out of the frame? In what way do object-based and subject-based qualities occur in the picturesque? How does the picturesque manifest the term whereby via its modes of representation? And also, how is the spatiality conveyed through the picturesque representation, both in visual and verbal respect? And these are the methodologies that I utilized through my thesis process. So firstly, I made a literature review for basically the definitions of the atmosphere, object and subject-based qualities of the atmosphere, relationships of the atmosphere with the picturesque, discourses on the aesthetics in the 18th century, and also environmental atmosphere and the picturesque spaces. So also for the visual and verbal archives, I made an archival research for my paintings and poems as a case study for the thesis. The study is, however, mainly based on the critical reading between the consecutive centuries, The atmosphere might be defined as a third presentness, having the potential to create strong relationships between environmental qualities, that is object-based, and the human states, that is subject-based, via the senses. This critical reading also shed the light for the reading model as well. The proposed reading model is based on the nature-based layer and the feeling-based layer, and they respectively corresponds to the environmental qualities and human state definitions of Gernet Böhme. And due to the vast picturesque archive, I also provide subgenres while discussing the verbal and visual artworks. These are based on the inside of the picturesque and called as pictorial, intellectual, and emotional. These are also corresponds to the depiction-based, memory-based, and sensation-based side of the picturesque, respectively. However, these are not only shaped by the 18th century. Instead, it is aims to carry the out of the frame with the atmosphere generators of Gernet Böhme. His theory is translated according to the needs of the picturesque. This table, for example, shows the translation of the picturesque for verbal domain, however, and this shows the translation for the visual domain. In this regard, to make the analysis more legible, I applied my reading model to the verbal domain as seen in this slide as an example, and I will make it clear in the cases part. And visual domain by also utilizing Howard Robertson's book, The Principles of Architectural Composition. So in the chapter 3, it was mainly about the atmosphere theories, which consist of the out of the frame. So the term atmosphere is the most frequently utilized concept in today's theoretical discussions prevailing in the disciplinary intersection of aesthetics and architecture. The concept is very fruitful in terms of handling and analyzing complex relationships such as the ones between subject and object, feelings and environment, or the procedures of spatial experience, perception, cognition, and sensation. So therefore, this chapter is reserved to understand this very concept and its nature by referring to the mentioned complexities. So the atmosphere as a term referring to the meteorological sense actually intrinsically goes back to the 17th century, and it has been derived from the Greek words atmos, meaning vapor or steam, and speria, meaning sphere in English. The atmosphere in etymological respect points out the meteorological concept bestowing and sustaining our lives and existence. However, in the beginning and towards the mid of the 20th century, especially with the rise of phenomenology, this meteorological sense evolved metaphorically into an aesthetic context by standing out in the empiricist discussions, and its use has been accelerated in the architectural discourses, especially after the 1990s. So the atmosphere has been conceived as a third presentness, leading to perceiving the subject and object bases individually, but as the connected phenomenal sources. Genus loci is referred to the object-based phenomenon, for example, while the essence or mood is referred to the subject-based disposition, including the personal background formed by such as sensation, memories, and emotion as well. So this strong connection between the subject and object led to the term atmosphere being codified with experience. Hence, new contexts started to define the atmosphere as a phenomenon being connected and understood with the experience of a subject. The picturesque, on the other hand, was mostly understood as a frame and transmitted to architecture in that way, since it started with a common interest in the art of painting. Therefore, many architects or garden designers mainly attempt to design this frame. In the picturesque ideation and designs, however, according to my proposal, is that the thing that is aimed to constitute was not the overall frame, as referring to the picture-like meaning of the term. It was the scene instead, which was aimed to be attached to the scenario through which the layout of the scene appears. Therefore, an experiencer of the picturesque tries to read this scenario through the object and subject-based qualities of the scene, and she or he also starts to be a part of this scenario. In a closer sense to architecture, Gernet Böhme first defined the position of the atmosphere as and also in between the object-based and subject-based qualities. After that, Andreas Roh expanded the atmosphere definition of Gernet Böhme and derived the term whereby as a position of the atmosphere. In this respect, the term whereby indicates the shortcut between mental and material reality according to him. Therefore, the atmosphere evolved into a tool to obtain an aesthetic experience in that very space, and the subject who attributes a meaning to the object starts to stand out in any kind of aesthetic experience. In consideration of the definitions of Bölümü and Yarı, the dilemma between the object and subject-based qualities becomes more visible, and therefore discourses have searched for answers to the question of whether the atmosphere mainly depends on the object-based or subject-based qualities. In a more detailed look, Bölümü's atmosphere mostly occurs within the sensibilities and sensitivities, and his generalities of the atmosphere are defined in three main groups of characteristics, which are things, bodies, and also movements. Then he also adds the non-thing-like generators beside the things category. Accordingly, the things refer to the objects and corporeal identities, while the non-thing-like qualities correspond to the sensory perception provided by the non-corporeal features such as light and sound. The bodies are the subjects mindfully living, perceiving, interpreting, and reshaping the meaning of spaces, while the movements are the subject circulation traces delimited by the architectural envelopes. This table, as I've already shown in critical reading part, has been translated according to the insights of the Bölümü's theory for verbal domain, and this for visual domain. I will also make them detailed in the following sections. So since the atmosphere oscillates between the object and subject, I first look at the object-based discourses on the atmosphere theories. In this respect, we may first find the discussion of Christian Norberg Schulz in his seminal work, Genius Loci towards a phenomenology of architecture, where he undertook the definitions of specific terms in architecture like dwelling, place in the sense of Martin Heidegger, and Genius Loci. Therefore, according to the basic terminology that defines the boundaries of his work, especially the dwelling one, we may comprehend the idea of Norberg Schulz as existentialist regarding the object-based qualities of the aesthetic experience of architecture. Architecture, therefore, may be thought of as a tool to visualize the genius loci. So the vision of an architect is to create meaningful places whereby he helps to dwell. We may be of the opinion that Norberg Schulz defined the boundaries of his phenomenology in an object-based way. In the subject-based shame, on the other hand, discourses of Tonino Grifero has an importance by also shaping the proposed reading model. His theory has resemblance to Hermann Schmidt's in terms of centering the emotional sensibility, and he also uses the term felt bodies, as Schmidt already has did. However, the meaning that is ascribed to the term differs from one of the Schmidt's, because Grifero uses the term felt body referring to the corporeal qualities by differentiating between the usage of the term felt body in classical phenomenology, which means lip, and physical body, that is körper. As comprehended in the lines of Grifero, the atmospheric perception is based on a quite subject-based ground by making the subject centered and passive, and therefore the importance of the being perceived compared to the perceived more stands out. Here I would like to remind the proposed reading model because the feeling-based layer directly has been derived from Grifero's felt body understanding. So the chapter 3 is mainly about the inside of the frame, therefore it covers the aesthetics and picturesque ideations. So I reread the picturesque theories stuck between the beautiful and sublime definitions of the 18th century by taking into consideration the discussions in the previous chapter about the possibility of the picturesque atmosphere. During the debates, Immanuel Kant and Edmund Burke were the two critical names shaping the philosophy of aesthetics in the 18th century. For example, Kant first embraced the idea of Baumgarten in terms of sensory perception as a term referring to the base for our experience. In his prominent work, Critique of Judgment, Kant examined the nature of the feelings of the beautiful and sublime, and therefore interpreted them as the judgments that a mind can reach after an experience, which are important for this study to understand the discrepancies of the picturesque. Kant defined the beautiful as a way of judgment, which is universal subjective, that is neither as a cognitive nor logical, but totally an aesthetic phenomenon in intellect. The beautiful in this sense is more related to form in a limitation, whereas the sublime is related to limitlessness in a representation, and at the end, the beautiful is codified as the act of understanding, whereas the sublime codified as with the concept of reserve, that is quantity. However, Burke's beautiful corresponds to a pleasure and is evoked by the terms such as softness, cleanness, fairness, or smallness, whereas his definition of the sublime corresponds to the pain, which is evoked by some feelings like terror, greed dimensions, insights. Therefore, the beautiful and sublime start to refer to the definitions of pleasure and pain. Similarly, the picturesque was mainly shaped by the landscape painter William Gilpin, who stated that the way nature is designed also led us to perceive its beauty. Variety, irregularity, and surprise are the main principles for designing nature. We know that variety and regularity are among the principal tools of the design disciplines of the Romanticist age. Thus, they provide us with a geometrical and perceptual language for composing objects, that is nature for the picturesque. However, the aesthetic effect of surprise works differently than the other two. It talks to ramblers in picturesque environments in a dialogue with objects, which also underlines the subject-based phenomenon. The variety and irregularity as the composition principles help us to anchor the effect of surprise, which is mainly provided by the availability of unexpected landscape elements, such as the follies belonging to different architectural styles in historical and geographical context. So in this regard, two rule-maker designers were distinguished by their works, which echo strongly in both practical and also theoretical respects. These are Sir Uwadala Price and Richard Pay Knight. They opened a new perspective in the picturesque debate of the 18th century. For example, Price looked at the picturesque within a framework of Burke's beautiful sublime definitions, and he thought of the picturesque as a third category in the Burkean reading beside the feelings of the beautiful and sublime, and tended to read this concept mainly over the physical realities, that is genius loci, or we can also say that object-based qualities. Whereas Knight looked from another perspective based on a more psychological and subject-based side of the picturesque. However, at the end of the debate, surprisingly, they proposed similar approaches for the practical side of the picturesque, despite the disagreements on the theoretical side. Price, for example, criticized the lack of genius loci of a place in Brownian-style gardens and defined the picturesque with the keywords of rawness, irregularity, and also sudden variation. On the other hand, Knight criticized the subject-based within the term association of ideas, which later evolved as an associational matter by Nikolaus Pevsner. Also, according to Knight, the picturesque would not be defined by only its visual qualities, because as in the atmosphere, the picturesque has a poetic, that is, narrative side to it. In other words, the objects might be evaluated without the subject matter. However, for the artworks, it would not be proper, because any kind of artwork, and also the picturesque ones, is a combination of aesthetic and associational matter of a subject. The notion of associational matter is not only limited to poems, that is textuality in the perspective of Knight, but also expanded into painting visuality. The two different manifestation aids you see in the figures by the Thomas Harn explicitly show this importance given to the textuality and visuality of the picturesque by Knight. In that respect, Knight displays different understanding of the picturesque in a visual manner. According to the previous lines, it would not be amiss to interpret that Knight probably say Price and Brougham, who were the prominent names of the picturesque debate as known through their contrasting design approach, by the way, as scapegoat for the most distinct contrast between beauty and sublimity in the picturesque debate. Similarly, the picturesque was categorized into 4 phases by Nikolaus Pevsner in his 1949 article Richard Pay Knight. This categorization reveals the development of the term picturesque in England. I renamed the 4th phase as picturesque atmosphere, and it constitutes the backbone of this thesis. However, Pevsner's division between phases might lead a reduction to somehow in the multi-layered meaning of the term, because all phases have inseparable connection and actors, and moreover, an actor might be active in different phases as well. Therefore, I also examined the picturesque cases in my dissertation by proposing a new kind of categorization. The categorization that I offer was formed in the framework of the definition of the picturesque atmosphere. Hence, in this section, I first aim to mention the picturesque atmosphere regarding how it's sensed by means of the representation, like visual and verbal artworks. In the end, I proposed a new analytical reading model for the interpretation of the cases in which the term picturesque atmosphere is quite visible. I believe that the new reading model will pave the way for examining the spatiality legible through the cases of verbal, that is mostly poems, and visual, and mostly paintings, artworks, within the framework of the picturesque atmosphere. These constitute three different subgenres, by the way. The pictorial subgenre in this respect refers to the painted, or designed frame, in which the compositional principles are applied in a balanced way. With the idea of framing, it emphasizes the visual side of the picturesque and displays a limited piece of nature or a landscape. And if you look at to the 18th century lens, we can say that it's in between position between the beautiful and also the sublime. So the intellectual subgenre, on the other hand, mainly entails the presence of an experience or creator, and therefore connects the human state and the perceived space. In other words, the intellectual picturesque gardens work with the definition of a night, that is the associational matter, and address the personal capabilities. Therefore, it has the capability to be codified with the sublime definition in the 18th century. And lastly, the emotional subgenre refers to the environmental qualities, and therefore the space, place, or spatiality with its perceivable qualities prevails in design, as we can also find in Price's picturesque design. In this respect, Bronze design successfully reflect emotional dominant side of nature, or the Augustan style, because it's mainly about with the beautiful idea of the 18th century. As I previously and briefly mentioned, if we were to translate Boehmer's generators into the structure of the verbal artworks, we may find the representation of the objects in verbal respect, with the names of the objects instead of things and bodies. The names representing the objects, that is related to the landscapes with their figurative meanings, or adjectives and emanations refer to the things, while the subjects or myths with their personifications and feelings in that very text refers to the bodies. On the other hand, the actions provided by the verbs in that very text, leading us to feel the tones of the emotion in the representations, may correspond to the movements. Besides, the non-thing generators may also refer to the temporal and also spatial narratives through which the intended message is conveyed, and help the reader to discern the narration behind the verbal one, that is for the poem. For the nature-based layer, therefore, I can say that I examined the objects and emanations of that very objects and subjects or myths. And these are the cases that I've chosen for the proposed subgenres. These are mainly the poems from the 18th century. However, we may also apply it, Gernot Boehmer's atmosphere generators into the visual artworks. In this respect, the figures representing the objects, it might be architectural and natural, standing in still or fixed position refer to the things, while the ones demonstrated with subjects, that is humans and animals, point out the bodies. On the other hand, the vectorial associations or powers leading us to the definition of further guidelines in the visual files of representation may correspond to the movements, which also cover the visual and bodily vectors of subjects, and may also be classified under the non-thing-like generators. Besides, the non-thing-like generators can also refer to the composition and gestalt principles, stylistic expressions of the figurations, sensory effects such as lighting, color, and superficial ones, as well as the temporal and spatiotemporal. In order to read the picturesque spatiality within the context of atmosphere, I introduced the cases selected from the verbal and visual artworks to be examined by the following the proposed reading model, which is based on the subgenres pictorial, intellectual, and emotional. The model gains importance because the subgenres pictorial, intellectual, and emotional correspond to different qualities of artworks, and therefore all of them highlight different sides of the picturesque atmosphere. And also I choose examples from the verbal and visual artwork from the 1730 to 1830 to make a limitation in terms of time. So in the framework to examine the picturesque from the perspective of atmospheric studies in architecture, I focused on a set of poems and some ballads written by the prominent poets or writers of the 18th century. By concerning the time limitation of the presentation, however, I choose a one-verbal representation from the emotional subgenre to show the layers and the relationship of that very layers with the proposed subgenres. The poem is The Landscape by William Shenstone. So as you see in the first verse, for example, Shenstone portrays a natural but emotional atmosphere through his feelings by ascribing them to nature. He constitutes a nature-based character for his picturesque atmosphere, by using nature bowers, scene and flowers. He also depicts nature moving together with the feeling in a balanced way, and his first feeling about the natural atmosphere is pleasure, and therefore it directly shows the way for the beautiful oriented atmosphere as in Brown's and Price's idea, because the mentioned feelings are appropriate for the definition of the beautiful. For example, he harmonized pleasure with flowers and bowers, which might be accepted as a beautiful oriented atmosphere when they are put together. In the second verse, opposite to the first one actually, he uses the nature-based components. Therefore, the only felt body, or we can also say subject-based feeling, is sweet. And he characterizes the smile of the hill, the vale, and all the landscape around with this feeling. These nature-based components gain a human ability to sweet the smile, and therefore this also constitutes the human state layer of the atmosphere by referring to a felt body. The hill, the vale, and the old landscape around by the personification became a felt body that has the capability of reacting and creating the poet's own moods in the environment. In the third verse, however, the hill, the vale, and the old landscape around again, on the other hand, gain importance because as environmental qualities in these verses in a different way. They are reflected as human state within their capability to smile and have a feeling. However, in the following lines, this time they become environmental qualities, which also shows their intrinsic relationships in a poem. Therefore, in the landscape, Shenstone follows a language that is more dominant on the nature-based, or we can also say object-based layer of the atmosphere. Moreover, he also makes the nature-based layer stronger with feelings, and therefore he associates every nature-based expression with the feelings. Even the nature-based components such as the hill or stream are connected with feelings at one point to somehow. I also tried to show these relationships in some kind of tables. For example, mention adjective clauses of nature-based expressions and their emanations define an emotional picturesque atmosphere in terms of the perspective of Brown and Price, because as I've already mentioned that they have contradictory idea about the picturesque. The hill, for example, appears in different paragraphs. However, the function or ascribed feelings to the hill make these environmental qualities closer to the idea of Price, Brown, or both of them. Sweet the smile, the hill, the vale, and all the landscape around have a connection with the Brownian style, picturesque, for example, whereas their character of being felt, as opposed to the poet Zell, has a connection with the picturesque idea of Price. In the next section, I also reread the prominent visual artworks selected according to the proposed subgenres of the picturesque atmosphere. Again, by concerning the time limitation, I choose visual representation from pictorial subgenre. This representation is a painting made by George Lambert in 1742, and it's a real place named as Chiswick House and Gardens. So the building and the balustrade represent the only visible element of the balcony and correspond to the geometric expression as you see in the left-hand side slide. However, the aesthetic characteristic of both objects and figures are different. The building emphasizes a completely artificial entity with its architectonic language, while the balustrade, partially visible at the terrace, implies an impression of kind of a surrender to nature and the overwhelming character of the greenery. The trimmed bushes surrounding the landing path to terrace and functioning similarly to the stone balustrade refer to the geometrized nature. The grass covering on the floor of the terrace also fits into a geometrical organization. These design treatments demonstrate the neoclassical attitude, as we may also find in neoclassical French Cartesian gardens, for example, of designing nature by changing its wild and disorganized appearance. Thus, although the greenery is organic in nature, it was designed geometrically. On the right-hand side picture, the greenery elements and lake as the natural elements, and the human and dog figures refer to the organic expression. The clouds in the sky, however, are given amorphously. The overall painting encompasses again geometric, organic, and amorphic expression. This balance between the shape-based language is for inviting us to the pictorial atmosphere of the painting. The relationships, that is the object-based and subject-based relationships with the vanishing line, also affect the aesthetic characteristic of these various subjects and objects. The vanishing line locates, for example, for the geometric building in both the upper and the lower sub-visual files. While the vanishing line, the upper part of the building is wider than the lower part, which makes it perceived above the eye level, but the upper part was not exaggerated in its dimension, thus the sublime effect is broken at some point. The balustrades and the floor of the terrace have a distance from the vanishing line. They are indirectly combined to this line by the perspective rules and were positioned under it probably to provide a more area for the rest of the figures in organic expression. Therefore, the lower positioning of the majority of the geometrized elements, as covering the whole bottom file, is for setting a balance between geometric and non-geometric figures. However, in this figure, the organic expressions referring to the greenery and lake are positioned in both the lower and upper files, though they cover a large area in the lower file. Integrated with the amorphic expression of the clouds, as you see in here, these non-geometric elements of the painting create an impression of dominance in terms of the size of the subvisual files they cover. The organic greenery touches the vanishing line in a greater proportion, while only a short part of this line passes through the geometric form of the building. The dominance of non-geometric elements over the geometric ones in this sense may also be interpreted as an attempt to break the artificial-based language of the painting, coming from the neoclassical understanding of design. The human figures, both on the terrace and also small figures near the lake, and also the dog, and the child, on the contrary, are located not only on the lower part of the vanishing line. The human figures located behind the balustrade on the edge of the lake are quite close to the vanishing line, although it's hard for us to perceive them at first glance because of their sizes getting smaller in the perspective. The bigger human figures viewing the landscape are positioned, again, very closely to the vanishing line in perspective. However, the farthest figures to this line, the child and the dog, are given in almost equal size with the former ones. The perspective rules of the painting and the natural sizes of the humans and the dog balance each other in scale and proportion. Although there are not many human figures, the existing human figures tend to give more clues because a glance carefully shifts on them. Therefore, a viewer begins to more focused while looking at the existing human figures due to the lack of human figures. The vectorial dispositions of the human figures and the dog also give an idea about the painting by means of shaping the scenario. There are two distinctive positions for them regarding the vectors of their sides. The faces of those sitting near the lake were turned toward the viewers. It's also the same for the child and the dog on the terrace. However, they provide different contributions to the scenario. The effect of narration in those sitting near the lake is not as strong as the child and the dog due to the distance-proximity relationship of Gestalt. Therefore, the effects on the terrace are stronger than the ones near the lake. The human figures near the lake or on the terrace show the couples communicating in a similar manner, which refers to rambling and narrating as the spine acts of the picturesque designs. These acts also imply the peaceful atmosphere felt through the painting, showing us the leisure time activities in that very age, 18th century. Only the child and dog are acting differently, for example, petting or playing each other, and their looks and faces were almost turned toward viewers of the painting. In this sense, they are the unique elements giving an idea about the joyful feeling base layer in the atmosphere. In this picture, however, in the meantime, although each figure couples has different characters and narrations, they have unity in terms of their actions and thus the movement vectors. They have slight movements such as bodily gesturing while talking to each other, weaving the garden while standing still, or, for example, petting an animal. The variety in the narrations is balanced by the equilibrium in the movements. The vectors of slight movements, or maybe non-movements, and serene body postures point out the style of the neoclassical paintings inspired by the Renaissance period once more. The scale of the building, on the other hand, compared to the human figures on the terrace is almost one-to-one, and it draws attention on behalf of the human and dog figures. Although the house figure has an advantage due to its being the only geometric figure in the organic dominant language of its background, this gestaltic, that is figure and ground relationship, turns vice versa by the organic human and dog figures situated on the geometric background. Moreover, the scale and proportion provides a gradation between different figures as well. The human figures near the lake in this respect are quite hard to sense compared to the ones on the terrace due to their scales. The other important composition principle observed in the painting is connected to the tactility of the environment, which may be directly related to the design tendencies of the landscape architect, for example, William Kent, as the designer of these gardens, by the way. There are some surfaces that are a representation of smoothness, especially in Brownian style gardens, and ruggedness according to the picturesque idea of Price, as we already mentioned about. The contrast between the smooth and rugged surfaces can be observable through especially the greenery. Smooth and rugged surfaces are represented to viewers in a balance as the characteristic feature of the pictorial subgenre. For example, the trees are the rugged surfaces, however, the terrace and the near the lake greenery are the smooth surfaces for the paintings as well. So, but this balance was designed asymmetrically with the help of the contrast principle between the tactile aesthetics effect. So, as a summary, in this thesis, one may easily perceive and follow the aesthetic connections and legible ties between picturesque and spatial atmosphere in an architectural context, since the narrativity of design fits both approaches through spatial and environmental experiences. This definition and meaning of the picturesque atmosphere in this regard call for a bridge between the 18th, 19th, and 20th and also 21st centuries in theoretical and also practical respects. And this bridging context of the term was also reinforced in the thesis by looking at the aesthetics and atmospheric theories and discussion of these centuries. On a larger scale, this thesis also revealed the similarities and differences between the aesthetic understanding of the past and the present by associating different centuries with each other and putting into practice the examples from different verbal and visual subgenres. Ultimately, however, the picturesque atmosphere ascribes spatio-temporal meaning to its own being, aiming to eliminate the tension of the 18th century, that is the feelings of the beautiful and the sublime, and the 20th and 21st centuries, the notions of the present in space and present in time extension, at the intersection of the aesthetics and architectural disciplines. In this respect, the picturesque atmosphere as a proposed term emerges as a concept shaping the roots or genesis of the spatio-temporal tree of aesthetics, whose branches are generated yet not concluded by the atmosphere discourses, and it's an attempt to make this formation legible. And thank you for your listening.